Fear's contagious. Lucky for you, there's no cure. Hospitals are creepy. It's a fact. Sure, they're supposed to be about healing and saving lives, but peel back the antiseptic layer, and you've got a buffet of human misery, regret, and secrets. Oh, and ghosts. Don't forget the ghosts. This story begins where most horror stories do. A night shift. And not the fun kind where the vending machine eats your dollar. No. This one featured screaming. I was on call, pretending to care about a case of stomach pain that was almost definitely caused by bad takeout, when a nurse burst in, wide-eyed, panicked. "You need to come to room 616. Now." Why? Did someone finally figure out how to die from boredom? No, you just need to see. Room 616 was at the end of the hall, isolated. I could hear the patient screaming before we even got there. The sound was raw, guttural, like someone being skinned alive. Except I knew the patient inside was alone. The nurse unlocked the door, and the screaming stopped. The man in the bed looked normal. Late 30s, pale, sweaty, but nothing out of the ordinary for someone who'd checked in with unexplained seizures. What wasn't normal was the way he was staring at the wall, muttering under his breath. "What's he saying?" I asked. The nurse shook her head. "We've tried recording it. Nothing picks up. It's just static." Of course it was. I walked closer, because bad decisions are kind of my thing. "Hey, buddy," I said. "Room service isn't included in your insurance, so I hope this is important." His head snapped toward me so fast I thought he'd break his neck. His eyes, dilated, bloodshot, locked onto mine. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "I get that a lot. Who's your neurologist?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was ice cold, his nails digging into my skin. "It's in the walls," he hissed. "It watches. It waits." Before I could respond, he started seizing. Violent, bone-rattling convulsions. The nurse and I managed to stabilize him, but when it was over, he was unconscious, mumbling that same nonsense. I spent the next few hours combing through his file. No history of mental illness, no drugs, no head trauma. Just a perfectly healthy guy who woke up one morning muttering about the walls and slowly spiraled into madness. By 3 a.m., I was ready to chalk it up to some weird neurological disorder and head home. But then I heard it, a tapping sound. It was faint at first, like someone knocking from the inside of the walls. I ignored it. I don't have time for ghost stories. Then it got louder. I followed the sound down the hall past the nurse's station until I was back outside room 616. The tapping stopped, but the door was open. Inside, the patient was sitting upright, staring at me. He shouldn't have been able to do that, not after the sedatives we'd given him. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. I didn't answer. I was too busy noticing the fresh scratches on his arms. "It knows you're here now," he continued. "It'll come for you, too." "Great," I muttered. "Can I schedule that for after my coffee break?" He didn't laugh. The lights flickered. Just for a moment, but long enough to send a chill down my spine. When they came back on, the patient was lying down again, unconscious, except now there were scratches on the walls, deep, jagged, like something had been clawing its way out. I should have walked away, called it a night, let the next shift deal with it, but no, I stayed. Because something about room 616 didn't make sense. I spent the next few nights digging into the hospital's history. Turns out the building wasn't always a hospital. In the early 1900s, it was an asylum. And room 616? It wasn't a patient room back then. It was a holding cell for the dangerous ones. One patient in particular caught my attention, a man named Victor Carlisle. Carlisle was a serial killer who claimed he could hear the walls breathe. He insisted they whispered to him, told him to kill. He died in that room, by his own hand, or so they said. The more I read, the more the pieces started fitting together. Patients who stayed in 616 reported nightmares, hearing voices, feeling watched. A few even disappeared altogether. The room had been closed for decades until the hospital reopened it last year. On my next night shift, I returned to room 616. The patient was gone, transferred to a psych ward, but the room felt alive. I closed the door behind me and stood in the middle of it, waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. The tapping started again. It was louder this time, coming from every wall. Then the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. And then I heard it. A voice. You shouldn't have come. The voice wasn't human. It was deep, guttural, like it was coming from inside my own head. I turned, trying to find the source, but the room was spinning. The walls seemed to pulse, closing in on me. I felt something brush against my shoulder, cold, clawed. And then I saw it. A face, pale, eyeless, grinning. When the lights came back on, I was on the floor, alone. The scratches on the walls were gone, but my wrist was bleeding, 4 parallel lines, like claw marks. I left the hospital that night and never went back. Room 616 has since been sealed off again. Officially, it's under renovation. But I know better. Sometimes, late at night, I hear tapping, and I don't look at the walls.
If you enjoyed this, you might be as twisted as I am. Like, subscribe, whatever, or don't. Just means you'll miss out on more reasons to sleep with the lights on.